So welcome to Design the Life You Love. This is our virtual tea 106. Welcome. This is our hearts beating with excitement still. And I like my heart beating when it's not palpitations for my big performance. I just like it when it's beating with excitement. So let's see, what do we have today? We're going to talk about, for those of you who are here for the first time, and if you are here for the first time, please say that this is your first time in the chat, and maybe let us know how you found us, and then everybody will welcome you. And then I mentioned we have a very special guest, Michael Alcee, coming up. So Design the Life You Love is transformative, and thousands of people across the globe have transformed their lives using this process, the youngest being 13 and all the way to 90 plus. And yesterday I talked about this and I said, you know, even people who were like 93 who came to my sessions, even they didn't question that they could redesign their life. And this is what's so magical about this process, that it's always a good time to redesign your life. So let's continue. And you know, the process is my design process, deconstruction, reconstruction, that we use with our clients. And it's about taking the whole apart to see what something is made up of, so that we can look at the same pieces from different points of view before we put it back together in different ways. And then from those different ways, pick the idea that really excites us, and we then give that idea an expression. And when it comes to our life, this expression could be, as we're exploring now, a micro segment of our life. We've been thinking about our mornings the last couple of weeks. It could be a day, it could be a project within our life, it could be a certain era of our life. So it really depends on how we want to think about it. And we all think, we're here to think like designers, which is with optimism, empathy for ourselves and each other, asking what if questions with an open mind, thinking holistically, seeing the big picture and connecting the dots in new and different ways. And just now I was talking about how Annette connects the dots and between her friends, and working collaboratively, building on each other's ideas. And our goal is to use our creativity to get through the complexity of life to a certain level of clarity and simplicity and elegance, really. And we do this by playing with ideas, because when we're playing, we're not afraid of making mistakes. So let's play together. And today is perfect because, I mean, improv is all about playing, right? And being playful. So Michael Alcee is here with me, and we met each other through Ruth Gauthier and Debbie Heiser, who they've both spoken at our sessions. And Michael is putting together a TEDx in September, right, Michael?
Right.
And I'm one of the speakers, and so is Ruth, and so is Michael, and so is Debbie, right?
I don't know if Debbie's doing it. She's going to be helping out.
Okay, so and I was telling Michael, my talk at the Fortune conference yesterday was a trial run for his TEDx. So I'm a good student. I'm getting prepared, you know, early on. And Michael, you'll tell us about yourself, but we want to share your book, which is The Therapeutic Improvisation. And Michael is a professor at the Manhattan School of Music, and he's going to tell us, well, you're also a therapist, a practicing therapist, right?
That's right. Yeah.
But we want to learn all about improvisation. So with that, Michael, the microphone is yours. How shall we improvise?
I love it. Yeah. So, you know, it's so funny when you talked about design and taking things apart and putting them back together, because the art of improvisation is trying to see a form and trying to tinker with it and reconstruct it and reconfigure it and vary it. And whether you're talking about music or you're talking about the psyche, we don't realize that we're all improvising all the time. And I think I quoted Charles Mingus, the great jazz bassist and composer, and he said something cool. He said, he basically said, let me just find it here. He said, my music is changing all the time, essentially because I'm changing all the time. So any of us who are really interested in something that's creative, whether it's music, design, acting, business, science, the psyche itself, we're always really should be always interested and curious and playful, like you said, about being alert to the possible changes and how to find the form and how to create new forms together. So in other words, what I think is the essence of psychological fulfillment is not only learning how to read the changes and get to embrace them, but also how to learn how to become more and more creative. And I think sometimes, this is Mental Health Awareness Month, and we often talk about like knowing a lot about all these different mental health issues. But I think one of the things that we fail to do as a culture is talk about how it is that really good mental health is about learning how to tap into our fullest creativity, both personally and professionally. So I'll pause there. I want to check if you had anything, Aisha, that you wanted to add here. There's so much we could talk about, and you know me.
Yeah, I love it. And what you're making me think is improvisation really requires being in the present moment.
Yeah, and the other thing that's funny about improvisation, and I think this is the paradox of creativity and improvisation, two things. One, it requires us being on the holistic and the molecular, and always kind of toggling back and forth between two. I kind of think of, the painter Georges Seurat. Remember Georges Seurat's beautiful paintings?
Yeah.
Well, you look and you stand back and you see this beautiful scene, and you could see the whole picture. But then when you look close to the molecular detail, right? Or the same with the Chuck Close painting, for example, too, right? And so to be creative is to kind of work both angles and simultaneously go back, so you can't tell where one is beginning and one is ending. And the other thing that's really interesting about creativity that some people don't realize, there's wonderful romantic things about being creative. It's like the most life-affirming thing in the world. That's why we're drawn to it, right? All of us. And yet it's life-affirming, and it's also death-defying. It's also very scary psychologically to be a creative person. And Salman Rushdie kind of talked about that in terms of being a novelist, that you're kind of on the edge when you're doing creative work. You're on a path, but you're also close to the edge of the cliff. And so being able to learn how to kind of get comfortable in that place and get interested in that place is a work in progress for all of us.
Wow, I really like that. Life affirming and death defying.
Isn't that cool? Yeah, I mean, I think I think David Bowie was totally right, and I don't think he was talking to just adolescents when he wrote that song Changes, because he's basically saying that we all have to turn and face the strange all the time. But of course, I think there was a great poet who said that poetry is making the strange familiar again, and making the familiar strange.
Very cool. So would you like us to dive into the slides?
Sure, let's look at some of them. Maybe we'll improv on them a little bit.
Yeah.
So there you go. There's Charles Mingus, right? We're always changing. We're always shifting. And if you didn't think you're changing all the time, notice how some point earlier today, your mood was in one place, and then later on in the afternoon, it was in another place, or later in the hour, it was in a different place. And the person that you thought you were talking to at the meeting, or your significant other, you thought they were one person at one moment, but they've shifted.
Michael, it's so funny because this is one of the things that Marshall Goldsmith taught me. And that's now in my book, which is every breath is a new you.
Yeah.
And it's really this idea that, and the way he described it to me is, when I interviewed him, he said, you're not the same person you were when we started this interview. and the person who's the person you are at the end of the interview is going to be different. And it's kind of like the virtual tease, right?
Yeah, you know what's so funny? Tony Robbins, that the megawatt extrovert, motivational speaker, once said the two most important things for human beings are stability and variety. And we're built in such a funny way. We want to feel centered and grounded, but we also need novelty. It's a hell of a project to encompass. But when we can allow ourselves to stay the same while changing, and to change while staying the same, we're in the creative zone.
Wow. Plus you get brownie points for like giving us 3 dichotomies in the space of 5 minutes. So
yeah. So
I love those. Okay.
Keep on going with my slides. Oh, so it's all about finding our voice. And the funny thing is that we sometimes think of our voice only as our artistic voice, right? Your artistic voice as a writer, or as a painter, or as a musician. We sometimes forget that we have a personal voice that we're also. That's why, Aisha, when we talked yesterday, I was like, wait a minute, Aisha, remember your personal voice. That's the center of us. And when we're connected to that, we can do all the things that we need to do. We can flow. And then, like you said, we can be in the moment. And then here's John Coltrane, right? He's listening so intently, like he's almost in prayer, listening to Miles Davis play during Kind of Blue. As artists, as artists of the psyche, we need to be as good at listening to ourselves and each other as we are at playing. And that's why, if we can listen well, we'll understand the changes going on in ourselves and the changes going on outside. So I put this out there when I talk to therapists. I try to remind therapists that they're artists, just like these folks. If you don't know who they are, there's John Steinbeck in the middle, the great novelist. There's Tracy K. Smith, the poet. There's a young Meryl Streep. If you keep on going to the next slide, you'll see some other folks. I must have left them out. But here's how we look at creativity. We tend to see artistic creativity and personal creativity not too close. And there's some little overlap, but even artists at Manhattan School of Music say, oh, I'm not creative personally. But look at the next slide. Let's show where it really is at. When we're really connected to this instrument personally, emotionally, psychologically, it feeds the artistic creativity, and the artistic creativity feeds the personal creativity. And that's when we get really cooking, and that's when improvisation is really great. So here is Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, for those of you who've forgotten. These were the ideal proportions of man, and it turns out they're a square and a circle. And this is ironically how we're built. We are emotion regulation machines, the circle being emotion, and the square being logic. We are constant idea generators. And we are, like this man, like this person, a square peg in a round hole. We are complementary and antagonistic at the same time. And the brilliance of learning how to improvise is to learn how to fit those together in interesting ways. That is the goal of improvisation. But here's Johann Sebastian Bach making us remember that we all are built with a polyphonic mind and heart. In other words, polyphonic means that there's one voice followed by another and another and another, and it becomes a fugue. It almost feels like we are losing ourselves. That's how we're built. We start with a polyphonic mind, and we get practice with learning how to be virtuosic with one voice at a time. That takes practice, because sometimes it's really, really challenging with all these voices going on at once. What we're trying to do is make the noise into music. And of course, I've quoted every poet imaginable, from Pablo Neruda to, we'll see, Virginia Woolf, to Rumi, to Tony Hoagland. When we think we are one, we are actually many. Of the many men whom I am, who we are, I cannot settle on a single one. And he says, by the end of the poem, I'm going to school myself so well in things that by the end, when I explain my problems, I shall speak not of self, but of geography. We have so much diversity. If you go to the next one, you'll see another one. Virginia Woolf says the same things. We have all these different selves. And then who else? We can go from the next person to, I think is, who's next? Tony Hoagland. Even when he's singing Madonna's Like a Virgin, a song he thought he hated. That's how it goes when you're heading harder in different time zones. You don't find out till tomorrow what you felt today. So I wanted to kind of show you all what it looks like to see and hear the changes, what it's like to experience them. and how it can feel for us all the time, psychologically, creatively. So let's see if we can listen. This is, okay, you're gonna try it out. So this is what's called, and if you can, I know, we'll get the ad going. I'll talk while the ad is going. And Celine, when you get to it, if you could put it in like maybe a minute in. But we want to listen to a jazz player playing on a tune, what's called reading the changes. And reading the changes means that they are soloing on different harmonies that are shifting. And as they're shifting, they're trying to make something interesting out of it, right? And we're going to see that. Okay, that's good, Celine. That's perfect. There's good. A little bit before, just a little bit. So reading the changes is what a jazz musician learns. They learn how to kind of follow chords that are changing.
Can you hear?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Go for it. All right, and Celine, you can hear these ones at the beginning. Now I want to show you what he's soloing on. Scroll right back all the way to the beginning.
Should we
All
go
the
back?
way. We're gonna say this song is aptly called Giant Steps, because the harmonic shifts between them are huge and fast. And life comes at us this fast often. But if you go all the way to the beginning, Celine, right? Just rewind it all the way. All the way. There you go. That's perfect. This is what the song sounds like. So you notice we have a melody, we have some chord changes. So here, what you do when it's a jazz player is you start to read the changes and play over them. Are you ready? Here we go.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Oh, so we're not sounding great. We can hear the changes. They're all good.
Jaden, I think you can stop. Sorry, I
There we
can't hear
go.
you.
No, all good. It
But
just
that
takes
was
you away.
fabulous.
So, the funny thing is, sometimes people say, wait, what does music have to do with design? By the way, Aisha. Do you know what Goethe said about music? Music is liquid architecture. Yeah.
Who said that?
Goethe.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So what we're trying to understand when we want to improvise is understand how things are changing and possibly shifting, but how we can make something interesting out of them. And so I think, Aisha, we decided we wanted to get people to understand what are these different sides of self that are in us? What are all these different places that we can shift between? So I think it's on the next slide, but if not, I think I remember it. We talked about David Bowie and turning and facing the strange. For a little exercise, this is what I tell patients when they're starting therapy. I say, I want you to imagine inviting all of these different sides of yourself, all the different sides to a table to have some tea and a conversation. And I want you to be curious about which are the selves that get the most airtime, which are the ones that get the least airtime, and which selves aren't even invited or allowed at the table. The ones that you're a little embarrassed about, they're a little bit of a nuisance. You wish they wouldn't show up. Like the guest house, they're like roomy, like they're the guest that you don't want to come. So I want us to be curious because all of those are the sides that we can possibly improvise with. And usually the most difficult ones to improvise with are the ones that we don't have much experience with or don't get as much airtime because they're not ready to solo.
Cool. So Michael, maybe tell us a little bit, could you give us an example, how you would answer this question? And then as people put it into the, like, if you have 2, 3 persons inside of you,
Yeah,
who
and
shows up
sometimes
most, and
yeah, and sometimes, what, it can be, sometimes the primary colors of the stuff can also be like, which side do you tend to come from most feelings wise? Do you tend to start with sadness or anger more, or like which are the different sides that you give a little bit more airtime? Which are the more dominant places, or which are the dominant roles that you use? Are you the dissenting opinion? Are you the mediator? Like which different voice gets a lot of airtime, and which voice doesn't get a lot of airtime, right? I love that the adventure voice gets the most airtime. That's exciting. So like, I invite the smiling. I rarely invite intellectual ones, which is really, really cool. So that's interesting. So there's also something really emotionally connected with what leads there, right? By the way, all of these have virtues and they also have their shortcomings, which is why sometimes we need to switch it up a little bit. And the more we get to learn about these different sides, the more we can kind of move back between one and the other. And so sometimes it's really helpful to have that wonderful open-hearted voice. And then sometimes you might need that cerebral side. Or sometimes that adventurous side is really great. And then sometimes you might need that more conservative side. And I like the curiosity voice. You could tell we're with creatives here, because when we're leading with the curiosity voice, that's how you know you're with someone who has a creative spirit. The expert voice is, the child's mind is the curiosity voice, and the expert voice for Vic comes later. The generous voice. I like that. So it's interesting for Denise, this is my joke for Denise. So with Denise, I'd be like, you know what? I love that the generous voice comes, but every once in a while I'd be like, I want you to just be a little selfish this time, or I want you to like use your self-interest first, right? Just to notice how that side could come in. What else do we got? I saw some larger ones. Let's see. Martha Stewart voice more often. Oh, yeah. I should. My wife probably thinks I should invite that voice up to my office with all my piles.
who said the Martha Stewart thing?
Dean said. Dean Miles said he invites the Martha Stewart voice.
But I want Dean to tell us what that Martha Stewart voice says.
Yeah, a friend of mine, her name is Cynthia Darst. She's a coach, and she created a book called Your Inside Team. So like if your mind was a board table, identify all those different voices. So I did that about 10 years or so ago. And so the Martha Stewart voice, I don't always pay attention that things that match or things that are beautiful, or, Martha Stewart's phrase was, it's a good thing. I don't always necessarily pause and see those things. And so I can miss out on moments that were intentional, things that my wife has done, things that my friends have done. So the Martha Stewart voice tells me, pay attention to those little details of beauty.
Nice.
I also noticed there's something that someone said, that their introverted voice comes last. And that's an interesting one too. And I think, I've did a TEDx talk on introverts, and I love Susan Cain's work. And I think there's so much interesting creativity in that introvert voice. And I think in the culture, especially for creatives too, that voice is not given enough airtime, which is why I love Emily Dickinson so much, because she made sure she got that voice airtime, and she wrote it down, and her sister found all of her poems, and thank God she published them. So I would encourage also to see how you can get that introvert in front too. I love the divine child. I also saw, the me voice talking about myself and how I would be very silent, like that's how I do it. So in other words, it's interesting to see which voice takes a back seat, right?
Maybe Dieter could explain that a little bit.
Yeah.
Dieter, you want to unmute? Let's see, I don't see it. Oh.
Well, I think there's some outgoing voices and extrovert parts, but there's also this inner voice about myself that will be very, very silent in that conversation.
Yeah. But not silent inside your head, just not
Yeah,
vocal.
yeah,
Yeah.
correct.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, that's the other thing too that you raised too, Aisha, that even if something is inside, the music is still playing. And it's our job to try and tune in and listen more. Sometimes when I'm doing therapy, I feel like I'm actually conducting a symphony. And instead of just thinking about like at these sides of self, I like to think of which section of the orchestra is coming out more and which section maybe needs to quiet down a little bit more. Are your strings playing more? Is your brass section? Is your percussion, right? But all the great conductors know when to say when's time for which. And so sometimes it's really nice to encourage those different sides and say, wait a minute, I haven't heard from the woodwinds.
So, Michael, could you also maybe talk to us about improvising with other people? So one is improvising within ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are different personalities or instruments, but then when you're with somebody else, which could be your child or your partner or your teammate or your team.
Yeah, what's funny? It's cool because I think, so want to hear the good news and the not so good news? Which would you guys like to hear first? The good news or the not so good news?
The good news.
Dean, what do you think? The good news first. The good news is that we are actually built to be super empathic and super tuned in without realizing it. The right brain the right brain sides of us are tuned into emotion and tone, and they're picking up on things implicitly all the time. That's why when a child goes up to an adult, they can tell how open they are, how willing they are to play, and how tight they are, whether they're angry or they're sad, even if they don't say a word. So we are picking up on what kind of instrument we're playing with on the other side all the time without even realizing it. So one thing is you don't have to work, we just have to notice, right?
That's a good one.
But the not so good news is just as we have all these voices playing inside of us, so does the other person next to us. And if we're lucky, they know which voice they're playing and they can collaborate with us and we can make a really fantastic mashup. If they're not, if they're unconscious, we can get into a fight very easily or a disagreement. Or we could maybe kind of get connected for a few moments and then all of a sudden another side of them comes out. You've had this conversation, I know I have, I'll implicate myself, with your significant other where you thought you were talking about one thing and all of a sudden another side comes out and they get hurt or upset and you didn't realize what you did, or they do the same thing. The beauty of us is that we shift between all these different sides. The challenge is that we shift between all these different sides. Our design virtue is our design flaw. But what's creative about it is how we try to keep it into a place of noticing how it can still be something beautiful. And if we think about it as human beings, we're heartbreakingly beautiful. We do these things that we hope will get us closer, and yet we unexpectedly unravel things without realizing it until we start to realize it. Creativity is a messy process, but it's worth the effort, right? And improvisation in that way, whether psychological or creative or otherwise, isn't it true as an artist too, Aisha, like that you have to allow yourself to tolerate some in-betweenness, some messiness, some not knowing where you're going?
Yeah, it's as you were saying that, I was also reading what Michelle was saying in the chat. Michelle, you want to unmute and share that with us?
What did I say?
That's so what an amazing improvisation that was just now.
Oh, are you talking about how did the jazz musicians do it, improvise on the fly at such speed? Yeah, how? Based on that music piece that you just played us, and then going into the jazz improv side of it, it's like magic.
Yeah. It is like magic. It is like magic. And the other thing that's interesting too is it's like magic because when you're also listening, you're allowing yourself to surrender to something, but then you're trying to give it voice. And it's a way, I think there's something, I mean, there's almost something spiritual or mystical about it, where you're in your ego, but you're transcending the ego. I think creativity helps us to transcend that ego, which is why we all not only chase it, we all cultivate it, because we do feel most alive when we're in that space, but it also requires taking tremendous risks. So I say, like, therapy isn't for the faint of heart, creativity isn't for the faint of heart, and yet it's for some of the most sensitive creatures out there, right?
Would you also say, or would you also argue that the amount of experience that musician has adds to the ability to come up with something so fabulous on the fly, right?
Yeah, Michelle, I want actually, this is something that I want to demystify for you and everybody.
Okay.
We think that jazz musicians are coming up with this on the fly. Just as we think when Alcee makes a beautiful design that she just came up with it on the fly because she's brilliant, right? Just brilliant. She's just like, oh, look, there's just a flourish of Matisse with a little bit of Jackson Pollock. How did she do that, right? But it's always, yeah, exactly. Like, it's like Mary Poppins. It just comes, and you know. But the thing is, it's when we cultivate an art, a craft, it's this wonderful combination of discipline, spontaneity. Jazz musicians have gotten all these different kinds of possibilities and ideas. They have this whole repertoire of standards, old standards that they make new again. And whatever your artistic medium is, whether it's life itself or art or music or science or business, it's because you gain experience with recognizing the forms, and then you can be more creative with it in the moment.
Yeah. So Michael Dieter said something about trust, which I think is a great one to bring into this conversation. He wrote, for me, improvisation is letting control go and trust the unknown. Beautiful.
Yeah.
It's also trusting the other, trusting maybe yourself and trusting other people, right?
Yes, it's trust and faith.
Ah, okay.
See, faith is the important thing, you know. And you know, it's so funny. Like, this is a strange, like, a biblical reference, just because I was thinking all of a sudden, you know, our connotations of faith are biblical in a way. I think the story, you know, the old story in the Old Testament about Abraham being asked to sacrifice his son Isaac, right? Remember that story in the Old Testament? He's like 100 years old. He's finally had a kid, and in the story, God says to him, by the way, this is going to be through this line that your generations will come like stars in the sky and grains of sand, right? And then God says, go sacrifice him. Seems crazy. But I think the faith is of allowing yourself to not know exactly why you're doing something and where it's going, and then at the last minute, the angel takes away the knife. Because it really isn't about the literal sacrifice. It's about sacrificing the over-attachment to something. And sometimes a big part of creativity is also letting go and trusting in something bigger than yourself to help you. Or if you want to get a little bit more pop culture about it, it's like Star Wars trusting the Force. You can't force the Force, you have to surrender to the Force. You have to tap into the Force.
That actually is a great segue into our breakouts. We'll be with the Force. So do you want to set us up for our conversation?
I like May the Improv be with us. That's fantastic. That's great.
The chat improv is really cool, right?
Yeah. So, you know, the other thing is, I think we segment off our personal creativity from our artistic creativity. But what if we could allow more freedom in that personal place? What if we could be the artist, author, actor, musician, poet, and visionary? What would you do differently? How would you allow that to come in and get more voice? Just personally. Don't think about it right now in terms of your professional. But if you could think about, imagine if you were an artist as a person. Which sides would you want to try to cultivate more, give more room for, give more space for, give more voice to?
Is that like Dean's example of being on a date with his wife, and like where he was saying it's kind of like this jazz improvisation?
Yeah, you know, I think if we saw more of our personal lives, it's sort of like what you've talked about of designing your life, right? If we saw our personal life as an a continual artistic creation and invention and reinvention and reimagination, right? How much more happy and fulfilled would we be, right? Even just having that intention, that mindset, I think shifts things. Because, you know, as an artist, Aisha, don't you kind of get excited? Like when you're like, ooh, I wonder what I can do with this as an artist.
Yeah.
But do we say that personally? Not enough, I think.
Wow, that takes design the life you love to a whole different level.
Yeah. Well, I knew I was talking to the right person.
I knew I was talking to the right person, inviting the right person
wait.
in.
Who picked who?
That's so beautiful. So are we ready, everyone? Let's take a 10-minute breakout, and then we'll come back and share notes.
Aisha, can I ask a question before we dive into breakout?
Sure.
A short question. How I would like to have Michael's perspective about how he defines inspiration and improvisation.
Nice.
Yeah, I love it. You know, it's interesting. Inspiration is the heart and engine of improvisation. You know the word enthusiasm in English. It's a lovely word. And in America, at least, I don't know if in other countries, but we sometimes get upset at people for being too enthusiastic. Stop being so enthusiastic, right? But you know what enthusiasm actually translates to in the Greek? It means to be possessed by the gods. So if that's wrong, I don't want to be right. So inspiration is to be possessed by the gods. Inspiration is to be connected to that child, divine child that has wonder and that has vitality. And that is the muse for the adult. It's always the muse for the adult. And so inspiration is that opening, because the child always feels ready for curiosity and openness. And the child is, you know, the child's greatest place is being in the moment. And as Megan pointed out, inspiration is in spirit, and inspiration, you know, respiration, right? The reason why it's called respiration, or, you know, or spirit, right, comes from in the Old Testament when Adam is created, the Spirit of God is blown into him. You know, that's the animating force. And so I think you're right. I think improvisation is really driven very much by spirit, but then the expert's mind is the experience, the know-how, the technique, the sense of what scales are, or what harmonies are, or what your art background is, or what your business acumen is. All of that are the tools that you use. And having those adult experts' tools joined together, right? You remember the story of Peter Pan? You know why I feel bad for Peter? It's because Peter always wanted to be a little kid. He never wanted to grow up. But what he didn't realize is that when you're an adult, you have the know-how to make forms, and limits can be beautiful.
All right. This is where I need to put a stop to this improvisation and pull us into the breakout. Otherwise, we're going to run out of time. And I know this group loves hanging out in small groups, so we don't want to ruin their enthusiasm.
Nice segue.
Celine, could you put us in breakout rooms? Michael, do you want to go into breakouts with some people?
Whoever. Yeah, throw me with whoever. Sure.
Okay. It'll be draw the luck.
Yeah.
Ooh, Charles, love it. We have to save this chat as well. All right, I love it. Everybody's smiling. So what did you all talk about? How was the improvisation? Okay, I see Jack leaning towards the mic. Yes, Jack, what happened? Oh, I see your dog is also improvising.
Yeah, the dog will speak for us. Say woof. Quite honestly, Alcee, we talked about you and the impact that you've had on our lives. Thank you.
Really?
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
You're just improvising.
No, but we talked about the diversity of thinking that's in this group that helps make things happen. So
isn't that fabulous? Really,
yeah.
the collaboration
Actually,
that happens.
Amanda can be a better spokesperson, except she's driving 80 miles an hour, so I don't know if she'll come on or not.
Please don't. And don't tell me she was like in a room with you while she was driving.
She stopped.
She stopped for a Starbucks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just got back on the highway, so.
Okay, Amanda, please just, yeah, rather not. But I want to call on Cynthia, sure, who hasn't been here in a while, and it's so lovely to see you.
Thanks, great to be here too.
Who are you improvising with?
I was improvising with Vic from Minnesota and Dean from Mexico.
Oh my God, what a trio.
It was great conversation. I feel like I now have to go unpack my brain for about 3 days.
I know, right? 10 minutes with the three of you is worth 3 days. So
It was awesome.
what was the highlight? And it could be you or Dean or Vic who.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, he put it in the chat, but it struck me that how much discipline is underneath improvisation.
Oh, nice.
And, you know, how much commitment and how much getting things wrong and practicing until you get a toolkit so that you can actually improvise, and how different that is from being impulsive. So that's where my brain went right away.
Magical. Michael, what do you say to that?
Yeah, I was just writing it. There's a difference between being spontaneous and impulsive. And there's a difference between being spontaneously creative and impulsive, right? And so creativity has a little bit of intentionality to it, but it also has the magic of something that's a spontaneous gesture. And that's the secret sauce. When you can get that together, boy, you've got it cooking.
To say the magic sauce again. You have so many ideas. I'm having a hard time keeping up.
Well, that's because I'm improvising, Alcee. What was I? No. But the point, like I said, is that you know, there's a little bit of an intentionality with being spontaneous and versus impulsive. So impulsive is just a sort of reactivity, but a spontaneous is also something that is responsive versus reactive.
Yeah.
There's responsiveness is what we're after, not reactivity.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, you're making me think that what allowed me to be calm and spontaneous in my talk yesterday was that I practiced and practiced and practiced until I internalized what I wanted to say. And then, you know, I was worried a little bit, what if, like, I didn't want to practice so much so that it came out kind of like almost too practiced.
Yeah.
And so maybe you could talk to us about that as well. How could we practice, but not so much so that it loses its spontaneity?
Yeah, there's almost like, yeah, practicing over and over. But the other thing is, it's sort of like there's an old adage to read the book and then throw it away.
Yeah.
You want to take it in and then you want to let it go and then see where it takes you. But you've read the book. Yeah. And so it's sort of.
I wrote the book, actually.
You wrote the book. Yeah, you wrote the book. Yeah. And so, you know, I think it's like, if you think about our places where we when you're in love, you share from a place that's spontaneous, right? But hopefully it wells up in you so that you can just, it comes naturally, of what you want to express. And I think when it's coming from that place in your heart, that openness, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
But yeah, don't throw any books away because they're really valuable. I agree with Todd. You know, books are worthwhile. You know, put them on the shelf maybe, but don't throw them away.
Love it.
Hey, Shay, can I say one thing? It's Megan.
Yeah, Megan.
One thing I shared in our group at the end was that one of the things that resonated with me the most was the what we want is stability and what we want is variety. And I said, that's why I love Wednesdays at tea, because it's reliably every Wednesday, but there's always a variety of topics and feelings and emotions and shares. So thank you.
Oh, that's so beautiful. That was our reflection for the day, except it came at the end and not in the beginning. So Megan, thank you so much for that. And I'm so glad that I'm not late in sharing your new book and body of work, because I was worried. I was like, how did I forget this? So you let me know when we can add it to the newsletter. Everyone, it's 6:03 and we, oh, Jack, you're cracking me up. And which means our time is up, but we do have an after party. So if anybody wants to stay for the after party, and but if you need to leave, you're very welcome to leave, but do come back. Remember the stability. You can count on having a good time every Wednesday at 5 o'clock here. And then the spontaneity or the improv of the after party is because of Charles, who's looking very serious, but he's a party man. So, and so we'll party until 6:15. Michael, thank you so much. This was amazing.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was delightful. What a treat.
You make it look easy, but I know how practiced you are. And of course, you're a man after my own heart, because I love dichotomies. And then like,
oh, me too.
Yeah, we I think we're kindred spirits in dichotomy land.
Yeah, and then trying to figure out how to find something between them.
Exactly, the integration of the two. So very cool. Everyone, see you next week. Unless you want to party, this is where the real stuff happens.